I am tutoring with a Brandon because tutoring with a Brandon matters most to me. A Brandon was taught there can be no Father God without a Mother God, of being the goddess and wife of the Father God is what was taught to a Brandon. A Brandon was taught that the Father God is the husband of the Mother God. I told a Brandon that heaven is not a single parent household. A Brandon was taught that single parent households of strangers are households of strangers who chose to go to a heaven that is a single parent household with a Father God and without a Mother God. A Brandon was taught that God was never a single parent and that the heaven that is a single parent household is really hell and the lake of fire instead of heaven. Strangers followed the same ways of making those types of heavens on earth of single-parent households of going to hell and the lake of fire. I told a Brandon that the lake of fire is the sun in the sky where the souls of the evil devils shall burn and burn in. I told a Brandon that the sun is a lake of fire in the sky for the strangers who want to go to a single-parent heaven of the sun instead of with the Father God and Mother Goddess of love and marriage as a family. In the end, the soul of those strangers end up in the sky inside of the sun burning themselves because of the intentional evils the strangers did of creating the soul of strangers who are bastards. I told a Brandon that strangers claim to love the sun so much until the stranger's soul ends up burning inside of the sun in the sky because the sun in the sky is the single parent household and the sun in the sky is the single parent of which so many strangers' souls are burning inside of each day. Strangers said that God is bad. Strangers said that God made a bastard. Strangers said that God is a single parent. Strangers said that God is the cause of the birth of a bastard son. Strangers said that God never had a wife. Strangers said that the Son of God has a Father God and has no Mother God. A Brandon would never want to be those strangers who accused God of the sin of creating the soul of a bastard. A Brandon never accused God of being a single parent. A Brandon never accused God of creating a bastard soul. I told a Brandon fornication is not love. I told a Brandon adultery is not love. I told a Brandon what is made from fornication is not made from love. I told a Brandon what is made from adultery is not made from love. I told a Brandon that marriage license certificates of strangers is evidence of if strangers made births from love or if strangers made birth from fornication or adultery. I told a Brandon adultery and fornication is hate instead of love. I told a Brandon the reason the strangers are not a success is because the strangers got what the strangers got from living a life of fornicating ever in life and doing adultery ever in life and making a bastard soul ever in life, and it means all of them prostituted their own sexual intercourse in exchange for the idol god of jobs or careers or houses or cars or food or items or drugs instead of saving their own virginity of voluntary going all the way sexual intercourse for marriage. I told a Brandon it is as if some strangers was not strong enough of making it in life without doing fornication or adultery or making a bastard. I told a Brandon that doing fornication is worshipping the idol god of sex of fornication. I told a Brandon that doing adultery is worshipping the idol god of sex of adultery. I told a Brandon that making a bastard soul is worshipping the idol god of child sacrifice. It means making a soul for the wrong reason. I told a Brandon that making a bastard soul is worshipping the idol god of child sacrifice. It means forcing offspring into the position of being a bastard person, intentionally making a bastard since the offspring never chose the position of being a bastard. I told a Brandon that the sun in the sky is the visible lake of fire, and that all the strangers who claim that the sun is God shall end up in the lake of fire, which is the visible sun in the sky. I told a Brandon, the body of fire in the sky is the body of material matter that strangers became part of because strangers wanted the position of being a member of a body of a son because strangers wanted the eternal position of being in a single parent heaven of a son in the sky and wanted the son being the single parent God of them. So that is what the strangers can look forward to each day, is what I told a Brandon. A Brandon does not want to go to the single parent burning sun in the sky. A Brandon does not want to be a member of the body of the burning sun in the sky, which was never married, and which is not the God of a Brandon. I told a Brandon that the life of strangers is not a success. Because in order for those strangers to have those cars, jobs, money, businesses, careers, houses, and fame, of popularity, was from living a life of fornication, ever in life, did adultery, ever in life, made a bastard, ever in life. So it is not a success. It is not a success if the strangers lived a life of fornication, ever in life, adultery, ever in life, made a bastard soul, ever in life. Those are the idol gods the strangers sold their soul for, and it means the strangers are prostitutes of prostituting themselves and going all the way sexual intercourse voluntarily, in exchange for living the lifestyle of getting more than what a Brandon has. Those strangers voluntarily chose going all the way to the lake of fire at end of their life in exchange for those experiences, is what I told a Brandon. I told a Brandon that the devil voluntarily asked those strangers to make a bastard soul from intentional sexual intercourse. And the strangers said yes to the devil and sold the soul of themselves to the idol god of sex. I told a Brandon that the devil voluntarily asked those strangers to voluntarily do fornication. And those strangers said yes to the devil and sold the soul of themselves to the idol god of sex. I told a Brandon that the devil voluntarily asked those strangers to voluntarily do adultery. And those strangers said yes to the devil and sold the soul of themselves to the idol god of sex. I told a Brandon that the devil voluntarily asked those strangers to voluntarily have more than one marriage. And those strangers voluntarily said yes and sold their soul. I told a Brandon that the devil voluntarily asked those strangers to voluntarily have more than one marriage. And those strangers voluntarily said yes and sold their soul to the idol god of sex and adultery. I told a Brandon that the devil voluntarily asked those strangers to have a voluntary sexual threesome. And those strangers voluntarily said yes and sold the soul of themselves to the idol god of sex. I told a Brandon that a Brandon never voluntarily did any of those bad things because a Brandon said no to the devil and to the idol god of sex, is what I told a Brandon. I told a Brandon that those strangers are the strangers who said the Son of God is a bastard and has no mother God. I told a Brandon that those strangers are the strangers who said the Son of God has a father God and has no mother God. I told a Brandon those strangers are the strangers who said God does not have a wife. I told a Brandon those strangers are the strangers who said God is a single parent of a heaven of a single parent God. I told a Brandon that place is actually the lake of fire. A Brandon said a Brandon is not one of those strangers of going to the single parent God of being in the lake of fire. I told a Brandon, well done. A Brandon never said such bad things about God. A Brandon never said such bad things about the Son of God. Which is why a Brandon is never merging with those strangers of selling themselves into the idol of sex, of fornication, adultery. And is why a Brandon told God about those strangers who shrouded themselves. And is why a Brandon told God about those strangers who shrouded themselves in sexual vibes of fornication and adultery. A Brandon noticed many strangers have been shrouded in a strong sexual vibe of the evil spirit of the idol god of sex. A Brandon is still studying with me. Tutoring with a Brandon instead of fornication and instead of adultery. Tutoring with a Brandon is a way of keeping a Brandon out of the company of strangers who have been shrouding themselves in sexual looks and vibes and voices of the idol god of sexual fornication and sexual adultery and the idol god spirit of prostitution. A Brandon is not a trick. A Brandon is not a John. A Brandon is not a customer of prostitution. Which is why it is a waste of time for strangers to have ever shrouded themselves in bad spirits of bothering a Brandon. This message is from the employee of a Brandon. A Brandon can say what the words of this video means if any questions of strangers are questions of what the words mean. Only a Brandon can say what any of the words in this video means, because a Brandon is from a place where words may have a different meaning than what strangers think words mean to strangers. I told a Brandon these statements and made this video as evidence of why a Brandon is of the character a Brandon is. A Brandon is being programmed inside of his mind. With me talking to a Brandon. Being comfort to a Brandon. And this is video evidence of me talking to a Brandon. A Brandon has not spoke at all in this video. A Brandon is a very good listener of me talking to a Brandon. This video was recorded because a Brandon is being given his own basic instructions from me before leaving Earth and telling the God of a Brandon about all of the evil strangers who caused trouble to a Brandon. A Brandon says all of them are strangers. This video is a video of me being a stranger myself. I know a Brandon showed love to me, a stranger, and entertained me, a stranger, talking to a Brandon. A Brandon is slow and not a genius, which is why I talk to a Brandon, tutoring with a Brandon, instead of those bad strangers who never told a Brandon what words mean to strangers. This video was recorded so that a Brandon can hear and study these basic instructions before leaving Earth. A Brandon, keep listening and studying until the end of the life of your body, and you are guaranteed being saved.